Welcome everybody to the third Winning in the Solent Region event. It's so good to see that these events have got traction and support, and I know that they are being viewed not only live but also through the recordings. And I think that's an important point to make, that we are obviously recording today's session, so there will be opportunities for you to be able to share this with others and point them in the direction to see the event in the future. One of the key elements of the first two sessions, I think, is that it was so good to hear so much from James and Gillian, but today is also about hearing from you. We want to hear your questions and also observations. So I will be encouraging you to come forward and ask questions, get involved in the discussion. The best way to do that, please, is to firstly ensure that your videos are turned on so that I can see you. We're working as a group today. And the second thing is to, obviously, unless you're speaking, keep your microphone on mute. That will certainly help. We're joined today, as we have been from the first two sessions, by Gillian Saiva, who's the Head of Business, Finance and Accounting and Higher Degree Apprenticeships at Solent University. We're also joined by James McCalman, Professor of Leadership Studies at University of Portsmouth Business School. We're going to be hearing a lot from them, and they're going to be reinforcing an awful lot of what we've been hearing from the last two sessions. But also, this is an opportunity to explore new thoughts. This is a constantly changing landscape, and I think it would be good to hear where you are, what your thoughts are, what your concerns are. This is the third of our sessions, but this is a partnership that is built between the two universities, Hampshire Chamber and others, in order to take forward this programme. And we're looking forward to working with you all and with each other over the next 12 months. And hopefully next year, some of that will be live and in the flesh and not entirely on Zoom. But I will say, I think this is going to form a part of the way that we do things together because it's been so successful. So to kick things off, and just to remind us all of how we've got to where we are, I'd like to ask both Gillian and James just to give us a very brief 2 minutes update, a review of the insights that they provided during the first two sessions. And this will give you the chance to think of the questions that you want to ask. The best way to do that is to put that on either chat or, I think preferably, raise your hand. You can either do that yourself physically, I'll keep my eye open for you on the video, or you can do that by raising your hand on the participants section, and I will ensure that you're given the chance. All you have to do is unmute and ask the question directly. This is very much an interactive thing. But to kick off, could I please ask Gillian first, just to give a couple of minutes update on where her thinking is and remind us of the things she said over the first two sessions. Gillian.
Thank you very much, Ross, and hello, good morning everyone. Lovely to see you all here and some familiar faces back again. So reflecting on the previous two sessions, Ross, what I want just to share with you all is the work that I drew upon for those sessions was essentially based on the CMI's toolkit, which is known as the Better Manager's Manual. James focused on the wider leadership aspects, I focused on the management aspects. The CMI has developed this toolkit as a practical guide for businesses to help navigate their way through the impacts of COVID-19. And during those 2 weeks, what we looked at was the importance of working flexibly, how to manage a crisis, the importance of mental health and well-being, both for yourself and obviously your team around you, trying to understand the new employment landscape, and then the new good governance. And of course, this was all against a backdrop of change and the fact that it couldn't be predicted what actually happened. We looked at the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross grief cycle and how a lot of people were actually experiencing anger, shock, denial, etc., in actually coming to terms with what had happened. So perhaps business owners themselves were actually having to identify where they were on that and come to terms with their own mental health and well-being, and at the same time try to pivot their business to survival strategies and look after all of their employees at the same time. So it was very much in the context of where we acknowledged that this was a massive challenge, a massive crisis, nothing that any of us had actually planned or prepared for. And as a result of that, everyone was very much reaching out and wanting just to seek to understand and get new insights as to how they could actually do business better, but also manage themselves and other people better. I think what's come out of this is very strong act of kindness, people reaching out to support each other, but I think a big dig deep into how do we now survive in this new normal.
That's great, Gillian. Thanks so much. And James, if you could just give us a couple of minutes on to refresh ourselves on the subjects that you covered in the first two sessions.
Sure. I kind of tackled it from a wider leadership perspective. So what I was looking at was, I was making an argument that basically this is what would be called or classified as a wicked problem. So defining the types of problems that we have. So normally problems are quite tame and we can come up with managerial solutions to resolve those. But if you go into a COVID-19 crisis, that's a kind of critical problem. And what we expected is what we got. We've got command solutions, leaders telling people to do things, telling people to lock down. But as we come out of that, what I think is important for organizations, whether they're private, charitable or public, is how they deal with the future. And seeing the future, not if I hear the words new normal again, I think I'm going to go nuts. It's not normal and it won't ever be normal. It'll be different. And what we need to get the solution to is how do we solve these types of wicked problems now and in the future? So that might, for example, concern how am I going to do business if I'm not present in the one office or in the one factory or in the one facility? How do I manage different types of employees who are with me or who are remote? What are the organizational issues? How do I treat customers? What do I do with customers now that wasn't done in the past and won't be done in the past? Again, if I reflect on, I think we must have heard about 3 or 4 times this morning the desire to have next year's conference where we're all together. We might never be all together. That just might not be the case. So thinking about not going back the way, but going forward. What that led me to look at in the second session was how do you break people out of their comfort zones and try and get them to work on change? Because quite a lot of us are quite happy. I talked about a thing called the change garden, where parts of the garden, there is a sort of like little place of contentment, and people sit in that contentment. Everything's normal, everything's hunky-dory, things won't change. Quite a lot of what's happened in terms of COVID-19 is currently in that process or place of denial. There's another part of the garden is we deny that things will need to change. And I think as leaders, what we then need to do is almost shock people into different areas of the garden, getting them into confusion about what the future is going to look like, towards getting them into renewal process of being comfortable with change. And what are the challenges that you as a leader set your people in trying to understand, going from, say, contentment or denial towards renewal, obviously involves some type of change process. Gillian spoke about the Kubler-Ross model, or the cycles that people go through in terms of grief. It's also the same in terms of taking people through cycles of change. And that's a leadership thing. I think it's nobody else's job. It's what you get paid disgusting amounts of money for, is to show leadership, not management, show leadership. So that's kind of where we were at.
Thank you very much, Gillian and James. A really good refresher, and certainly I'm sure that's got some people thinking. If there's anybody who would like to ask a question, I can see those with their cameras on. If they'd like to just wave at me, I'd be quite happy to take a question. If not, I do have some pre-submitted questions that I could ask James and Gillian. But I'll give you priority if you'd like to raise. Simon's come on. Is he wishing to ask a question? I don't know.
I am. Yeah, morning. Thank you, Ross.
Thank you, Simon.
So it's a question to Gillian and James. It's funny. I was having exactly that conversation, James, yesterday with an associate organisation. So my business is I'm a business improvement consultant. So using Six Sigma black belt techniques to help organisations recognise where they're at, where the world is, and what they may have to do. And I've been talking a lot about trying to recognise where the new world is and what they might have to do. And I'm really interested to hear where you think organisations are in accepting that there's a level of change that they may have to do. And do you still think there's a lot of denial out there? Because from right now where I'm at, I know organisations I would want to work with are not ready to work with me right now because they've been in a very tactical, hands-on, reactionary panic mode. They're not really into long-term planning, and I think long-term has turned in from 12 months into 3 months. And the lady I was talking to has said, using the example of if the government can build a hospital in 2 weeks, why can't I change my organisation in 2 weeks now? So that appetite and that cycle for rapid change has really changed. So long term has become weeks. So sorry, it's a really garbled question. But I suppose the key thing is, do you still think is there a high level of denial out there still? Where do you see that level of appetite for change and that recognition for change?
I think we'll ask James first, and then Gillian afterwards. James, how do you see that?
Well, it's interesting because I get similar types of messages from clients as well. I think if I was classifying, I think they're in that borderline of the garden between denial and confusion. So there's quite a lot of organisations who know that things will need to change, but they've not got that final push to get over to say, yeah, basically we need to make these alterations. You've got quite a lot of them who have said, yeah, we are going to have to change, but they're confused about how they're going to go about it, which is probably where you would be best fit in terms of bringing in some help and assistance to them. But I think there's also this I think once you've gone through this, it's almost like grief. Once you've been through some major cataclysmic change like this, it takes a bit of time for people to grasp the nettle again. It's almost like we're exhausted. We've been exhausted mentally, psychologically. So do we have to go again? And it's almost like that's why I was being quite provocative, saying, yeah, you do. That's your job. Your job as a leader is to get us going again, whether it's for you as an organisation or whether it's for organisations in the Southeast helping other organisations, whether it's local government or national government. That's what leadership is about. Leadership isn't a management science. It's bigger than that. There are aspects of management attached to it, but at the end of the day, somebody has to turn around and say, this is my responsibility. This is the way I want to see things happening. I noticed there was a question in the pre-questions about my workforce being treated. The ones that are at home seem to be superior to the ones that are in the workplace. That's, if nothing, if not a leader's job, to grab that by the neck and say, enough. We don't have second-class citizenship in this organisation. Here is what's important for these individuals. Now get on with it. And that would be my argument: is push them forward. Just keep asking them serious questions continuously, and just say, you reflect back onto them, I get the feeling that you're not making these decisions or you're not ready. What's holding you back? Because I mean, that's a good business consultant, reflects to people like a good coach on what he or she sees from them and lets them get to the right place. But yeah, I would say people are borderline denial confusion.
Okay. And it's interesting you talk about, I call it like the change fatigue, and it's that we've got to pick up our bits and get going again. We can't wallow.
Change fatigue is a well-known phenomenon, and you can imagine how exacerbated it has been over the course of the last 5 months. Yeah. It was a normal phenomenon prior to this happening. It's now been exploded out of all proportion. But again, I think two aspects here: strategic and leadership. Strategic, smart organizations are not going to be thinking 3 months, they're going to be thinking what's going to happen in mid-March next year and be looking to that. So there's a strategic side of it. And then there's a leadership one, which is to say, recognizing your role and responsibility. It's not about heroism, and it's certainly not about that sort of Jack Welch phenomenon. It's more about taking care of business from a leadership perspective.
Indeed. Thanks very much, James. We have a question coming in, which I'll get to afterwards. But first of all, in response to Simon's, Gillian, please, let's have your insights.
Yes, so Simon, a very good question. And I think in my response to it, I draw upon the update that Pete Hooley shared at the beginning of the session, which are the early findings from the survey that's been sent out around the Hampshire region. And I think you can probably draw some insight from that as well, where obviously 30% of the businesses do want to grow, okay, which is really positive. I think it's interesting the context against that, where 45% of those businesses are actually family businesses. So you can probably think within that family business, there's strengths and weaknesses there in terms of how that growth can actually be facilitated. 89% of them are not exporting, okay, so you could potentially look at exporting as being a way that the business can grow. I think what's the more pervading challenge there is that 86% of those businesses are still not online. And over half of them are still just wanting to survive. And I think that picks up on what James has said, with some of them still in that sort of confusing state, trying to make sense of it all and still not having quite accepted it yet. If I was to draw upon my own experience of small businesses that I've had the opportunity to work with during COVID-19 pandemic, what I have seen is an example of obviously a family business that still wasn't online, certainly not exporting, wanting to grow, but having to actually make some fast changes, and in that sort of shock of it all, still having the, I suppose, the survival adrenaline to actually look for new consumers, look for new ways to actually get their product to market. So what they've done, they've put in some short-term plans to obviously adjust their product range, adjust it to a new customer base, and very much supporting the going local approach, where let's not go to supermarkets, let's try and get people to obviously shop local. But what I'm seeing now with this actual business, they're actually embracing their bounce back loan and using the bounce back loan to actually invest in a management information system for the business that will actually sustain greater growth in the future, and help them really align everything from their purchasing processes right through then to their ordering processes. And with that, they then are building their website alongside this MIS system that will of course be the whole back end of it. So I think they're almost seeing the pandemic now in reflection, probably a good thing that has actually happened to their business, because it's made them actually sit up and actually have a bit of a awakening and think, wow, right, we actually really need to embrace a more sustainable way of operating moving forwards. And they've actually sustained a lot of their income through by adjusting quickly to new product lines and getting a more local customer, as opposed to being a B2B. They've went B2C. But it's building that sustainability in now. So I'm seeing perhaps a little bit of acceptance of what that might look like. But I think from your business position of obviously being a business improvement consultant, it's then looking at, okay, well, how do you embrace these systems then for more sustainable managed growth moving forwards, and how you sort of build on obviously having that sort of nucleus of at least having a management information system in your business that then can give you a much better stability to actually build your growth from. So I do see opportunity. What I probably see is a lot of businesses are still just in panic mode, and they need people like yourselves, they need people like universities and business schools to actually reach out and work with them to help how to align their business for growth. So I think there's probably a bit of backtracking has to be done to actually build sustainable foundations for these businesses before we then really look at this upscaling of that growth.
Thanks very much, Gillian. I think one of the messages, we need to change the way we change, and I think it's a very interesting point. I think Sandeep, if you'd like to unmute yourself, Sandeep, and perhaps ask your question, that would be very welcome. Thank you, Sandeep.
Morning.
Good morning.
My question.
Yes.
It was simply a comment because based on what both Gillian and James have said, I think the definition, Simon, that you mentioned about long-term, short-term, in the business world, and certainly in commercial lending and banking, whereas in the past, banks and lenders have asked you to predict the future and forecast, they're now looking retrospectively. They want to know the performance of the last 2 to 3 years of that business. The forecast, given the uncertainty and predictability of what's happening at the moment, has had to be reduced to what's happening literally month by month. What's your management information showing you? Can you actually predict the future quarter by quarter? And as you reach the end of that quarter, what does it look like? So did your performance actually, let's say from now till September, was it 50% of last year? Or is then at the end of the, let's say September, your performance is going to be 75% of last year from September to December? And you've literally got to do it in bite-sized chunks. And in response to some of the comments made about whether businesses are in crisis or are not, or denial or whatever, in my experience in dealing with a lot of businesses, what I'm finding is that they haven't planned. There has been no contingency planning. It's difficult to plan for something you don't know, but the normal requirement for a business is to have a plan, to have an exit strategy, or to have diversification in place, all these things. The where businesses have let themselves down is there's not enough thought going into where they're going with all of this. And this is where, as Gillian has said, my work, your work actually can come in and help them and say, come on, put some structure into this. I know that Henry talks a lot about collaboration, etc. He and I work together, but your competitors could be your obvious future partners. You don't have to compete with them. You could align your business model to work with them in this period to actually ensure sustainability and growth for both your businesses. These are the kind of things that I've been talking about in terms of during the last 4 months in terms of my business.
Indeed. Thanks very much, Sandy. Operating in extraordinary levels of uncertainty. Does anybody would like to add or comment on Sandeep's observations? And that includes Simon, if you would like to. Very happy. Otherwise, I will go to one of the pre-submitted questions. I think you've achieved your objective there, Sandeep. Absolutely. I think it's well done. It's I think some very good observations. There are some very interesting questions provided in advance of the session, and I'd like to pick up on one, which I'd like to really, first of all, ask Gillian to comment on, which is around home working, I suppose. And working from home does have positive benefits, but it can also have a negative impact on local economies. Like for example, the city centre coffee shops, the sandwich bars, catering establishments, all have been put in place, built around the provision of large employers and employees around those scenes. And that's all changing. So how could large employers, it's an interesting thought, how could those large employers balance their workforce needs with the footfall needs in their local economies? Because obviously their changes are having impact on many other people's businesses. So some comments on that would be really worthwhile. Gillian, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Ross. So my reflections in this area really come from initially thinking of, okay, so this pandemic has came in, it's swept everyone off their feet without even realizing it. And when we look back at seismic change that has happened across worlds, countries, economies, sectors, etc., things come in and out of fashion, okay? And it's very hard to predict them coming in. It's very hard to stop them coming out of fashion again. And I think what we potentially will be seeing is these larger organizations who are having to make very big strategic decisions based on the survival and the financial well-being of that organization. And we know already that, for example, Canary Wharf in London, a lot of the banking industry is actually making some hard decisions now about actually keeping their head offices in that very expensive plot of land, which of course it's a massive cost. And of course, to bring staff coming in and out of that to actually work there. What we actually are seeing is those organisations deciding that no, we're actually going to reduce our office space because we've seen the productivity of people working from home. And of course, we know when these organisations are making these larger decisions, which of course will impact on the culture of how people work and the subcultures of economies that exist as a knock-on of that. I predict what we will see is the subcultures of economy within that will probably die and have to change. Now, we know some people might argue, well, where's the social responsibility for the organisation? Surely we should be doing what we can to keep high streets and city centres, town centres alive. And yes, of course, that is important. But I'm very conscious there's a much bigger evolution at hand here that we can't be exponentially smoothing for the rest of our lives. You know, nature has to take its course and the strongest of the species will survive. And if the need for one business is no longer there, yes, that business may decide to close its business, but then other business opportunities will come on the back of what the new business is. So, for example, with all the home working, we know already that a lot of builders and interior designers are very busy with doing loft conversions, with doing extensions, where people are now deciding that this actually is a new change in lifestyle, and they're thinking about the way that they're actually living and working within their homes. So there comes business opportunity for the building and construction industry, for the interior design and soft furnishings industry, with having office space created within your home, etc. So you go and try to buy yourself a nice office chair on wayfair.co.uk, and most of them are out of stock. So it's sort of where there are losers, yes, but then there are also winners as new trends and new approaches and a new culture emerges. And I think we have to go with it and let nature take its course. I know it's very controversial how I'm sharing my insights here, but I think with it becomes then opportunity.
Thanks, Gillian. James, do you have something to say on the same question, maybe from a leadership perspective?
Only that, God, I thought I was harsh. I think there are probably 2 or 3 points. I would agree with Gillian. I don't think that you can prolong the inevitable. So this crisis basically speeded up the death of the high street. And the high street will probably close off anyway. I suspect that it will take a different form, a different shape or form. I think the private sector is not known for being notoriously altruistic. So I think although we might love to say we want to help our local economies, when push comes to shove, if you've only got half your employees in your office, then that footprint is 50% down for all those who feed from that particular footprint. There's nothing you can do about that. Perhaps maybe think a bit more innovatively about how you can use those local suppliers. But other than that, I would tend to agree with Gillian that nature will take its course, or economic nature will take its course. Sad though that might be for a lot of small organisations, that's what's going to happen. And if you're one of those small organisations, maybe what you should be doing at the moment is thinking, where am I going to go? If I'm on Portsmouth High Street and I ain't getting no business, maybe I should just be shutting the doors and thinking about moving on and coming out of denial into a new reality. Where do I go? I mean, as uncomfortable as it is for me, because I like face-to-face teaching, this is my world now. And I need to accept, and I've had this very steep learning curve on what you can do online over the course of the last 2 to 3 months in terms of working with clients and working with students. It's not as enjoyable an experience for me as an academic, but it's still an enjoyable experience. And you just have to learn to adopt and adapt, much as we do in nature.
Absolutely, James.
I like the point I can actually be the nice guy in this one, and Gillian can be the nasty one.
Yes. No comment there, James. Absolutely. Thank you for that. I think that's absolutely right. I'd like to invite Henry, if you'd like to, just say a couple of words, because I know he's interested in this also from a sort of social corporate responsibility sort of point of view. He's got a particular angle maybe on that. Henry?
Yeah, hi folks. I'm Henry. I'm a self-employed consultant, Southampton based, but used to work for the council for 20 years in an earlier life. My fear, and it is very Southampton centric, but it applies to a lot of areas, is actually it's a bit like when the mines close. When the mines close, the whole communities are decimated. And we all know that the vast majority of people who have been affected by COVID-19 are young people, the sort of 20s to 30s, sort of work in hospitality, retail, leisure, and the rest of it. My fear is if organisations don't get their white-collar office staff back to work and contribute to the local economy, saying yes, the city centre will die, and it'll be a long, lingering death. It'll be a blight on the landscape. Because unless you've got some really strategic thinking about how you reinvigorate a city centre and what is it there for, you won't get footfall, you won't get people coming to the city, you won't get people spending money. So the economy keeps spiralling down and down and down. And it's just a real fear I have. And something you mentioned earlier on today about sort of a two-tier workforce, and it does appear that, I'm not a trade unionist, I'm not a Marxist, I'm not any of that stuff, but it does appear that if you're white collar, you're office based, you can work from home. And yet huge swathes of our population have been out working every day since it started. And have we become comfortable, and should we be sort of grabbing people and saying, you need to go back to work, back into the office, and that way you contribute to the local economy. Otherwise, we'll just get more and more people unemployed. That's my fear. I could talk about strategic leadership and collaboration later on, but that's my...
Thanks very much, Henry. I think that is an interesting point, and I think it helps us and takes us forward to a question that did come in before that has been already submitted, and maybe just to address that sort of corporate social responsibility. So somebody asked, do you think the global pandemic will really help us shift the way we do business so we become more people, socially and environmentally focused? It's beginning to feel like we may be defaulting to the old normal, maybe not the new normal. And how can leaders and managers ensure we seize opportunity for positive change whilst managing the day-to-day activities? There were so many elements to that, but I think there is an interesting one about our mutual responsibility as businesses and to maintain the economy structures in a way that will help businesses to progress and make their changes on a timely basis. Maybe asking too much, I don't know. Let's ask James first, and then Gillian to make some comments. James, how do you see that?
I think there are probably a couple of issues here. I think one is we will basically try and slowly return to economics. That is to say, I don't think this crisis is going to teach us much about changes to the social structure of our country. I think we'll come out of this, but we'll very quickly forget we're all in this together as soon as is economically attractive for people. You know, we aren't going to become a more Marxist economy as a result of a global pandemic. I think one of the things I'm beginning to see is quite a number of people using the global pandemic as an opportunity to change their own ways of life, and that would be the white collar workers. So people aren't rushing back to the offices because they know they can work effectively from home. It's more comfortable working effectively from home. I can get more done in 3 hours here than I can in 5 hours at the University of Portsmouth. It also means that I'm not having to buy a very, very expensive season ticket. And people are looking at this thinking, I'm being conservative, I'm being cautious, I'm not going to fork out £5,500 for a season ticket, I'll take life from home. So I think it might be difficult to actually convince that white collar workforce to get back to work because it's comfortable for them. I think that's the problem. I think though, economically, socially, we'll try and get back to the way the world used to be, because that's where we're conservatively comfortable with. One would predict that in a year's time, we'll be having the same climate problems that we had 6 months ago. Yeah, things don't.
James.
Turkeys don't go for an early Christmas.
Brilliant, thank you. Gillian, your observations, please.
Yeah, some quite similar to James there, but Henry, just picking up on what you had said, yes, I mean, I do understand where you're coming from, and we're certainly very aware of the sort of catastrophic impact the pandemic has had on the city of Southampton, and I'll refer back to my old industry that actually brought me from Ireland to Southampton was indeed to work in the cruise industry, which of course has been massively impacted. And of course it's the ripple effect of, you know, the taxi drivers, the restaurants, the hotels, the shops, the everything that's been impacted by the reduction in cruise traffic and the subsequent footfall around that. I think just bringing some awareness into how the minority groups are actually impacted. You sort of said that there's a bit of a two-tier society going on. We're talking about the white collar workers being those that seem to be having it all. I'm part of the old party parliamentary group Women in Work, and at one of the recent meetings there it was cited that women have actually came off a lot worse as a result of the pandemic than men. And mostly through women's employment is predominantly within the lower paid sectors, particularly the hospitality sectors, which of course are still impacted by the pandemic, but particularly retail and also the hairdressing and beauty industry. Now the latter has just been given the green light to obviously open up again, but what we have seen is a lot of people that have been impacted that hasn't been overt, and of course homeschooling and things like that, what they have said is that it has set back the gender pay gap and the transition of women in the workplace by about 10 years. So I think that's an interesting thing to think about moving forwards. But enough about women. I'll say that before someone else says it. Looking then at the wider aspects, I think it'll be interesting to see how we look at what the actual skill set requirement will be moving forwards within the region as we emerge into the post-pandemic economy. I'm sure I can speak for Portsmouth as well, where of course within the university we're looking very carefully at our portfolios of courses to see, well, what's hot and what's not. What courses are we going to offer that actually will have jobs when the students go to graduate? And particularly the likes of the hospitality and tourism industry, which was normally very buoyant down in this area. It's not something that a 16 or 18-year-old will probably be thinking, well, I'm going to go and actually upskill myself in that, because there's loads of jobs in that industry. So it's looking then at, well, what will these young people choose to do in order to upskill themselves? And I think it's looking at what type of economy will emerge. We know traditionally we're working on a knowledge economy. We know we're also in a post-Brexit phase as well, with of course more focus on export, more focus on making Britain great again. So is there going to be more opportunities for innovation and so forth around that? So that's something to think about. But just pulling on James's points around the impact of workers working from home, it's had a positive impact on our green agenda as a country. And I think that's something that organisations should be making considerations towards as part of their social responsibility. Thinking, well, what is actually the benefit of having X amount of people driving in and cluttering up the M27 and requiring extra carriages on the railways, etc., when ultimately productivity can actually be better if these people are working in their homes. So I think it's not wanting just to return to the old normal because that's what we were familiar with, but we know there was aspects of it that were not very good at all. They weren't good for our economy, they weren't good for our health and well-being, but all of a sudden it was the only thing that we knew. So everyone was just running off the cliff edge really doing it, weren't they? So it's now having the chance to really reflect and think, okay, in how we build our businesses and our products back up again, how can we do it with climate responsibility in mind? How can we do it with productivity in mind? And how can we do it with actually the health and well-being of ourselves as business leaders and also our staff in mind as well? So it's sustainable 360 degrees.
Thank you, Gillian. I'm going to, because we've got 10 minutes to go, and I would just like to ask you both to just consider this. If you have 15, 16-year-old in front of you, they are obviously thinking about going to university, they're thinking about their career, they're thinking about the future, and they're in the midst of the biggest social, economic, and one might say cultural change that's ever fallen upon society. Certainly in our reasonable living memory, and certainly in our historical understanding, I think. What would you say if you just had the chance to say two very wise things to that 15-year-old right now? What would those two very wise things be that you feel would help them steer their course a little bit better towards this new economy and this new way? And because I know he can claw this from the top of his head, I'm going to ask James to go first. What would that be?
I'm kind of a traditionalist, so when I talk to 15 and 16-year-olds, my first words of advice is, there's nothing better than a passion. Follow what you're really, really passionate about, because you'll always have a career. I mean, I'm a professor of leadership studies. That was the last thing in my mind when I was a sweaty 16, 17-year-old up in Scotland. You know, what I got as advice was, if you're interested in this topic, you put more enthusiasm and love and life and caring into it, and that will get you, that will jettison you out. Because no matter how much advice I give a 15 and 16-year-old, where they end up isn't going to be due to me. So from an academic perspective, I'm traditional. If you like physics, follow one of the physical sciences. If you're into dentistry, that's where you go. If you want to get a career in finance, you're going to have to go down this road. and do the thing that you really enjoy.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Don't end up like us.
Thank you, James. Gillian, what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so my thoughts, I'm going to draw upon some inspirational words shared in the Disney Cinderella movie, okay? So it's not all butterflies and squirrels, but the two key things is to have courage and be kind, okay? To have courage, this is where you need to be able to adapt, understand that you will have to retrain consistently, because as James has quite rightly said, what you will start out to do, you will end up doing something different. But have the courage to actually believe in yourself, go out there and actually try something different, and actually work beyond your capability levels that you actually know to you, because it's only by stretching yourself that you will actually learn and develop. Okay, so it's really important to have courage. And then to be kind. Well, number one, you're going to have to be kind to others. Okay, if you want to succeed in whichever industry, you need to understand to be kind to others, to be kind to your environment. So be kind to the world that you live in, because it's the next generation that's going to have to look after us to hand it on to their generation. But also to be kind to yourself, and putting yourself at the center of it all. All of this work that's been done now around mental health and well-being, it starts with every individual to be kind to themselves and make it their own responsibility to look after their own mental health and well-being. And if you do all those things, they will fly.
Thanks very much, Gillian. It was a slight trick question, and I can see Sandy probably picked up on that. The situation is, of course, that same advice we could give ourselves at any stage of our lives. And this is the key to it. We get so lost in our careers and so lost in our sectors and so lost in our own experiences that we sometimes forget that this constant change, this constant challenge we should address with positivity. And so I tend to think that what you can say to the 15, 16-year-old, and maybe the 15, 16-year-old former self, is something that we should constantly remind ourselves. And this is really an aspect of what we have been confronting